Ferrocerium rod, one of my absolute favorite methods for lighting a fire. Virtually impervious to the elements. If you drop it in the water, get it back out. You don't necessarily even need to dry it off before you use it. Just strike it and you've got sparks. Really hot sparks too. These average somewhere around 3,000 degrees Celsius, which is almost 5,500 degrees Fahrenheit. With enough practice, you can use one of these to ignite almost anything you'd use a lighter for. So it's a really good tool. Downside to that, using one of these, most of them come in two pieces. You have a rod and some type of striker, which is fine, works just perfectly well. But what if you're injured and only have one hand, right? You only have one arm. One arm's broken. You've got a severe cut in the palm of your hand and you can't hold anything with it. What do you do then? Well, what I'm going to go over today is a method that I like to use for using a ferro rod with one hand. There are a lot of different methods that you can find on YouTube and various places on the internet. But this is a method that I like to use, so I'm going to share that with y'all today. So I'm going to go over here to a log that's at a convenient height to work at, and we're going to go over that. So stick with me. There we go, work area. And as you can see, both of my arms are still operational. I've not injured one yet. It's a good idea to practice using a ferro rod with one hand with both hands, right and left hand, which I do. And I can do this method left-handed, but it looks a little bit awkward. So for video purposes, I'm going to be using my right hand just because it looks a little bit nicer that way. Another thing, if you've had a class with me or talked with me about ferro rods, then you'll be aware that I'm not a fan of using a knife as a striker in most situations. Right? So let's say that you are using your knife. Right? Most people will do something like this. They'll plant their knife, use their ferro rod with it. Issue with this though, there's a whole lot of exposed cutting edge here. And if you slip, you get in a hurry. I've seen people even in situations where nothing's wrong. They just get in a hurry because they want their fire to get going. They'll slip. And use my finger as a ferro rod for a minute. Alright, they're striking along, doing fine, they get in a hurry, and maybe they miss, go over the top. Or they work their way down toward the end where the point is. Right? Not ideal. So for the most part, I'm not a fan of using a knife as a striker. But for this method, it does require a knife. And that might seem a bit odd considering I don't like using knives, but this method is quite safe for the most part, and I'll show you why. So here we go, injured arm, left hand, it's going through my vest sleeve hole there, so I don't use that arm. Right, so now I've only got one hand to work with. Got a baton here that I found laying on the ground underneath this log, so I'm going to be using that. I've got my ferro rod in my pocket where it normally resides, and my knife is in its sheath. So here we go, let's start a fire. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do, get out my knife, and I'm going to stick it in this log. And luckily this log is a little bit soft, so this is not real hard to do. Let me find a little bit. There we go. That might be a pretty good spot there. Gonna get that wedged in there just a little bit. Take a baton and just get it in there pretty good so that it doesn't really want to move. Right? Now, I pretty much always carry a stick of fatwood in my pocket, so I'm gonna get that out. And this is what we're gonna use for tinder. Now, one thing I do not have here, because I'm not going to be building an actual fire, I'm just going to be lighting stuff. If I was going to be transferring this to a fire lay, I would have something up here where once I get my tinder processed, I can then place it on a piece of bark or something like that to carry it once it's ignited, to carry it to my fire lay, which might be over here or something like that. So that's the only thing that's missing from this setup, is a way to carry the ignited material to the fire lay. All right, so we've got this in place. All I'm going to do is scrape some of this fatwood, and this does require a sharp spine on your knife. Right. If your knife doesn't have a sharp spine, this method just won't work. You might be able to get some shavings from your fatwood or whatever your preferred material is. You know, shaving down small bits of dead wood or things like that. But without a sharp spine, you probably won't be able to get any sparks off your ferro rod. So the sharp spine is pretty important for this. That should be pretty good there. Some of it's falling off the logs, rolling off. That'll be alright. That's more than enough there to ignite. So I'm just going to kind of get that into a little pile there. Put that back in my pocket so I don't lose it. Get over here, find my ferro rod, which I always keep clipped to a belt loop so I can't lose it. Alright, get everything gathered up there. There we go. Now then, the way I do this is I support the end of the ferro rod with my finger as I drag it across. That way, you know, if you drag it like so, you can see it kind of lifts up. So if I keep my finger on there, I can keep a nice steady amount of pressure along the whole length of the rod. And now let's see how many strikes it takes to ignite this. 1. Boom. There we go. I'll move my knife out of the way. Get that out of there. Put that over there. And now we have fire. Super simple. Super easy to do. Knife with a sharp spine. Drive it into a piece of wood so that edge on the end that you're working on is completely covered. There's very little risk of injury that way, theoretically. You still want to be careful, but theoretically there's very little risk of injury that way. Nice and solid, and there you go. Fire with a ferro rod with one hand. So, awesome. It works. So I was about to put my stuff away and I realized that this could be a great opportunity to talk about an additional one-handed method for lighting fire that just uses a dead stick rather than something kind of fancy like fatwood. So you break this off here in the fork of this log using one hand, and this might actually be out of frame for y'all to see me breaking this, but there we go. Get that out of there. Alright, so there's a stick right there that we're going to use for method number 2. It's really awkward trying to work with a stick with one hand like this, but it's good practice. So let me see here. Let's put that right there so it doesn't go anywhere. Get my knife out again. This time, rather than going in at an angle, which I think I went that way, I'm going to stick this in just like that. Get that in there. I'm going to drive that in straight in, just like so. I'm going to put that in there pretty good because I don't want it to move. That should be alright. So with this then, what you do is making feathers with one hand, or curls, or whatever you want to call it. Some of them are falling off. I'm trying to get through the bark though. It's a little bit time consuming. You will notice that my hand is well behind the knife doing this. Really good idea to keep your hand way out of the way when you're doing this. So you already got one injured arm, you don't want to have another. So I've got a pretty good spot, so I'm just going to go along here, make some curls, just like that. Pulling along there, nice and easy. Now I mentioned the previous part of this that a sharp spine is very important for this technique. I should rephrase that. A sharp spine is important for this for practicing, as you don't want to mess up the edge of your knife by striking a ferro rod with it. In an emergency, I would not care if I had to use the edge on my knife. I would probably just use part of the edge that I don't use all that much anyway, which would be the section right up against the handle, right in this area here, way up high, because I don't use that for carving or anything like that as much as I do a little bit further out on the edge. So in an emergency, I would just use the edge, strike my ferro rod, and have a fire, and call it a day. There we go. That should work. Don't fall off. There we go. Okay. So that should work there. I'm going to move my knife here. I could just leave that there and strike it, but I kind of want to gather these up, and I don't want to do that around the cutting edge, because I'm kind of particular about my fingers. So I like to move the knife out of the way when I'm doing this. So now, let me turn this around here. Get those little bits right there up closer to where I'm going to have the knife. That kind of gathered up there. Get some of those in there. Now you could do this quickly, but there's a saying that I like. Don't have time to do it right, but you have time to do it again. Just take time to do it right. Works out better that way in the end. Okay, so now take this, put it in there, right there. And this log's pretty soft, so I'm just gonna call that good right there. That should be all right. And now let's see if that will ignite. It's not much. Typically I would probably want to make more shavings than that, but this might work. So let's see. Yeah. Almost. And I hit the stuff. So let me put it back where it goes. Right there. Stay there. Oh, bad strike. Almost. There we go. Awesome. So that works too. You can see it already went out. But if I had more shavings there, then that would continue burning. So there's two methods, right? One with fatwood, one with curls and shavings and things like that. And that might actually, no, that's too much out. But there's two methods, right? So Using a ferro rod with one hand is not as difficult as it may sound or it may seem. So I would encourage you to get out and practice this kind of skill. It could come in handy sometime. You never know. But if nothing else, it's a fun challenge. So would encourage you to try it. And with that, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I would very much appreciate it if you would like, share, subscribe, do all the things with YouTube. Drop a comment down below. I'll definitely read those and reply to them. And until next time, have a good one, and go light some stuff on fire. It's a fun time.